Hey everybody, Will here from Downtown Activities. I've been homesick the past couple of days, and I've just kind of been taking it as an opportunity to try and get some work done on a few things. And I figured it was kind of a good chance to get another video done in my writing series. I apologize for the weird noise in the background. My CPU fan's kind of been going crazy for a little while now, if you can hear that. It's been showing up in the background of a whole bunch of our recordings. Sorry about that. Today we're going to talk about genre versus aesthetic when it comes to storytelling. I'm going to focus primarily on science fiction and cyberpunk as a subset of science fiction because cyberpunk I think is just a good example of this conversation and the differences between mere aesthetic and sort of true genre. But this conversation is of course much broader than this. It's just tends to be easier to distill this type of stuff down into single concepts. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I think there is a difference between true genre or subgenre in storytelling, at least among some genres or subgenres, and simple aesthetic. I don't think this is actually all that profound, but it becomes an interesting conversation for storytellers to have. Cyberpunk is a good place to start with this conversation. Cyberpunk has an aesthetic attached to it now that isn't all that cyberpunk is. You could easily have a game or story that matched the mere aesthetic of cyberpunk, while completely missing the point of cyberpunk as a subgenre. Let's talk about science fiction for a moment before we jump into cyberpunk specifically, since cyberpunk is a subgenre of science fiction at large, and understanding science fiction as a true genre helps to understand the conversation about cyberpunk. Now, treating science fiction as a genre. Science fiction as a whole has reached much the same point as cyberpunk as far as most works, or at least many works, trending more towards simple aesthetic and not touching on the true core genre at all. Science fiction as a genre is meant to focus on pieces of advanced technology or advanced scientific learning, usually theoretical and possible, or an existent piece of technology or science taken to an extreme, and studying how that thing affects life, learning, knowledge, and often deals with grand philosophical themes of human advancement, the dangers of technology, humanism, transhumanism, or is meant to put human life, society, and history in a new and particular lens. Frankenstein is an excellent example of sort of true science fiction, and it's widely considered one of the first pieces of such. In order to be considered true science fiction as a genre, it has to be tackling some larger theme, even if it's just using the lens of advanced science or technology to study an existent theme and not necessarily introducing a new one. The Matrix is true science fiction, and in many ways cyberpunk, because its entire structure is examining reality and freedom, and what exactly either of those truly mean. On the one hand, you get characters like Morpheus, determined to free themselves and others from the false reality of the Matrix no matter the cost, and no matter how bad life outside the Matrix is, simply because reality and freedom are worth it in and of themselves. On the other hand, you have Cypher, who has seen the difficulty of reality and would rather live in the Matrix in comfort because, at the end of the day, that reality is just as valid as any other. Of course, the entire Matrix series is laden with hints that even what people view as the real world might just be another layer of the Matrix. Now, on the other hand, we have science fiction as a mere aesthetic. Spaceships, aliens, laser guns, flying cars, holographic communication devices, lots of technical jargon and advanced technology, but not really dealing with any true larger theme. Questions of existentialism, free will, our place in the universe, our place amongst ourselves, and the like are all well beyond this aesthetic. Good stories can be told here, and many are, but they just don't deal with larger themes. I think, honestly, Star Wars fits into this category. All of its conversations about the Force edge on philosophy, but never quite get there. It's the spectacle and the aesthetic, not the grand themes. I love Star Wars very dearly, the look and feel of its world building, the style of its characters, and it was a huge part of my life growing up and has had a huge influence on my own storytelling. I just don't think Star Wars crosses into the field of true science fiction. Alright, let's move on to cyberpunk as a subset of science fiction. Cyberpunk deals with themes of reality, identity, free will, humanism and transhumanism, all through the lens of technology, greed, violence, and usually overt dystopia. Often described as low-life and high-tech, and it draws upon a lot of noir and neo-noir elements, an interloper trying to find something, and someone trying to find an interloper, or someone trying to find themselves. It often relies heavily on darker themes. It's often extremely violent, and it's using violence to examine things like humanism and transhumanism. Advanced technology doesn't improve life in these stories, and often they intentionally contrast vast societal and economic differences, and struggle to find what make us human, at what point we stop being human, what reality is, and the like. The Matrix, Blade Runner, Neuromancer, and stories like this. All these can easily be considered true cyberpunk, and Blade Runner and Neuromancer in particular are widely considered kind of the progenitors of the whole genre. On the other hand, and much more common these days, we have cyberpunk as a mere aesthetic. Neon, high-tech, implants, commonly available weaponry, strong disregard for the law at all levels, corporations that are powers unto themselves, street samurais, all that. It's sometimes a fine line between cyberpunk as an aesthetic and cyberpunk as a true genre, but there is a difference here. Don't get me wrong, I love cyberpunk as an aesthetic, and it often has its own things to say, and it studies its own brand of morally gray or straight-up morally dark characters in interesting ways. It simply isn't touching on the same themes of reality, free will, humanism, and transhumanism. Is all this a bad thing? Well, no, not really. Stories are fine by themselves, even if they don't tackle any truly grand themes or touch upon philosophy. Most of what I write tends more towards aesthetics than true genre or subgenre. That's not a bad thing in most cases. They're just stories, and I write the stories that I would like to read. Falling in love with an aesthetic and seeking out stories of that type is completely fine. That's part of what makes science fiction or cyberpunk itself so compelling. The neon, the holograms, the style of its characters. People don't always fall in love with the grand themes or philosophies of a work, though this does happen for many people and for many works. For most members of an audience, though, or most readers, it's the aesthetic that grabs them and keeps them coming back. It's hard to hold constantly to themes of a genre without ending up being derivative or uncreative. This is part of the reason that aesthetics often replace genres as the core definition associated with a term like sci-fi or cyberpunk. The best works of a genre explore their themes in subtle ways, and don't beat the point home to their audience. Blade Runner is a good example of this. The core discussion of humanity is quite expressed through the characters of Roy and Rachel, but the film truly touches upon free will, reality, and its humanism and transhumanism themes through its main character Deckard in really subtle ways. The question of whether or not Deckard is actually a replicant that doesn't know his own identity is never raised directly. If you take the whole film at its face value and never dig any deeper, Deckard is obviously a human because the film never says he isn't. And maybe he is. It certainly doesn't change the impact of the questions that the film is asking. The thing is, the film is asking those questions, and with it is studying those much grander themes. It becomes a poignant question to ask because Deckard is the vessel through which we experience much of the film and its world, and when placed across from Roy and next to Rachel, both of whom are asking those same questions in a much more open way, though from different angles and from different levels of society, it paints Deckard in a new light. We are forced to ask ourselves the question of Deckard's existence. Good genre fiction, especially something like cyberpunk or science fiction, something that truly fits the core themes of its genre, never gives us answers. It asks questions, and we are forced to decide on our own what the response is. Even better, it quietly and subtly forces us to ask those questions instead, and gives us some material to explore and study, but still forces us to come up with our own answers. Why does any of this matter? Well, it's important to understand that there is inherently a difference between genre and aesthetic, and that is going to affect the type of stories that you tell. Stories are an excellent vessel for exploring grand themes, raising interesting questions, or approaching philosophies. And these stories have a way of both sticking around and strongly affecting some readers. But not all stories have to be this way. Stories can just be stories. It's good to know the difference here, because if you want to write something that truly fits a genre, you should know what makes that genre stand alone. The themes that are often explored and the ways in which it is usually done. Knowing the rules is how you begin to bend or twist them. As I said earlier, it can be hard to work for too long with content that is trying to fit the core themes of a genre. Sooner or later, something ends up feeling like a knockoff, and a lot of people attempt to explore their grand themes in a very in-your-face kind of way, which I've certainly been guilty of in the past. It's better to be understated and subtle when trying to deal with themes like this. If you're working on a cyberpunk noir in which your hard-boiled detective is constantly stopping to muse on the nature of humanity every other page, it's likely going to get old for the audience. That's not to say that characters can't call out the grand themes or core philosophical conflicts of a work in very overt ways. Again, Roy Batty is an excellent example of this. Roy's entire quest to overcome his own ticking clock is extremely overt, and he gives a grand speech just before he dies about the sadness of what will be lost with his passing. The reasons that Blade Runner can get away with this are sort of threefold. First, its writing is excellent pretty much across the board, and Rutger Hauer's performance as Roy Batty is legendary, and he just carries the entire performance very well. Second, like I said earlier, the actual questions that the movie are asking are being asked silently about a different character entirely. And third, Blade Runner was early on in the whole cyberpunk movement, so honestly it can just get away with being a little more overt. Well, I hope there was some value in this. It felt a little rambly to me, but that might just be because I'm still kind of sick. If you're interested in stuff like this, Downtown Activities has a lot more content that's kind of an ongoing discussion about storytelling in general. I highly recommend the Bonus Action podcast, which is just a monthly series where Erickson and I sit down and have an hour-long discussion about running tabletop RPGs and just kind of storytelling in general. Each month is a different topic that we try and stay within, but sort of touch on some adjacent stuff as well. I really do think there's a lot of value in there, and it's an excellent opportunity for me and Erickson to just like put words to thoughts and concepts in our head and sort of talk through how we like running these games that we enjoy so much. On the other side of stuff, I am working on a self-publishing brand, which is going to be coming fairly soon. It's just kind of a landing point for a lot of my various short stories and old manuscripts and stuff like that either I couldn't get published somewhere else or didn't feel like submitting. That will be coming soon. The first two books there are both manuscripts that are a couple of years old that I'm just kind of polishing up and putting out because they're just kind of what I had done. One of those is a cyberpunk novel to fit the theme of this video. It is a little more aesthetic than it is genre. I probably wouldn't give myself the credit of saying that it's genre at all. But when that sort of self-publishing brand is built and set up, we will be talking about it on the channel. So if this kind of stuff interests you, or if you're interested in helping support me or support the channel, take a look at that. And in the meantime, go forth, slay dragons, sling spells, roll dice, and enjoy your downtime activities.